Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome to CEC live transmission. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk on application of demand and supply analysis, and for this discussion we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Bharat Singh. Dr. Bharat Singh is Associate Professor in Department of Economics, Satyavati Evening College, University of Delhi. Dear friends, if you want to ask questions from Dr. Bharat Singh on the particular topic, that is applications of demand and supply analysis, then you can call us through our toll-free number. The number is 1-800-110-430. You are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Bharat Singh and let's try to have a deep insight into the topic. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you very much Gitika ji and dear viewers and the students of this program. In today's lecture we are going to discuss different applications of demand and supply analysis, but before we proceed, it would be better if we have a very brief recap of what has been dealt till now in our previous lecture. In our previous lectures, we have dealt with problems of scarcity and choice, which gives rise to the central problems of an economy, and the central problems of economy mainly relate to the allocation of resources among different productive uses, that is what to produce, choice of technology, that is how to produce, and distribution of the fruits of the development among different sections of the society, that is for whom to produce. And besides these three important central problems, we have another important issue while discussing central problems of economy is the problem of economic growth, which relates to the discussion of how to enhance, how to accelerate the rate of economic growth of an economy. And next we had also discussed about the solutions to these problems, these central problems. The solutions to these problems that we had seen in our earlier part of the lecture, that depends on in what particular type of economic system we are living in, or the discussion of the solutions to the central problems of an economy refers to which kind of the economies of the world. Mainly or broadly speaking, there may be three types of the economies in this world: capitalist economy, socialist economy, and mixed economic system. And we had seen in our earlier part of the lecture how the central problems of economy are solved in these three different types of the economies. Then we had seen the concept of production possibility curve, and this production possibility curve was supposed to be a very important tool in the discussion of the central problems of an economy and their solutions. Then we had discussed the concept of price mechanism, referring to demand, supply, and the equilibrium price. This particular lecture in a way is connected with this concept of price mechanism, and therefore this topic of demand, supply and its application has been put before you for the discussion. The application, there are several applications of the demand and supply concept, or you can say the price mechanism. The first important application of the concept of demand and supply that would come under discussion in today's lecture is the price control and rationing. The price control or price rationing is also called price ceiling. Price ceiling in fact refers to the fixation of the maximum price of a commodity, and normally this policy, this practice is adopted by the government of a country, wherein a producer or a seller cannot charge the price above this ceiling price. So by adopting the price policy of price ceiling, the government can fix the minimum price of a commodity to be charged by the sellers or producers. And if the government has fixed the price of a commodity, if it has been fixed by the government, it is illegal to charge price of a commodity more than the selling price fixed by the government. And normally such a policy is adopted to protect the interest of the consumers. If the government feels that the consumers must get the product or commodity, particular type of goods and services at a relatively lower price, or the price which is determined by the free play of the market forces, demand and supply, then the policy of ceiling price or price control is adopted. If the government fixes, or the price ceiling may be fixed at any of the following levels. First is that price ceiling is equal to equilibrium price. If this is the situation, that price ceiling is equal to equilibrium price, then there is no effect on the prevailing price and quantity in the market, because practically speaking, the price ceiling becomes ineffective, because it is equal to the price that has been determined by the free play of the market forces of the price mechanism. So, there is no difference between the price fixed by the government and the equilibrium price. Second situation may be where the price ceiling is greater than the equilibrium price. Here also there will be no effect on the market price and quantity in the short run. In the long run, price would come down to equilibrium price via changes in demand and supply. Say for example, if the price that has been fixed by the government is above the market price, above the equilibrium price, then what will happen, that the higher the price, the supply will increase and quantity demanded will fall. This process will continue till such time the price becomes equal to the equilibrium price. So, in the long run, the price would rest at the equilibrium price that is determined at the intersection point of the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied of the commodity. The third situation may be when the price ceiling is less than the equilibrium price. This is the situation of excess demand and shortage of supply. If the price that has been fixed by the government is less than the equilibrium price, demand will be more and supply will be less. This situation may be depicted with the help of this diagram. In this diagram, we can see that OX axis represents the quantity demanded of the commodity and OY axis represents the price charged by the producer or the seller of the product. DD is the demand curve and SS is the supply curve, and at the intersection point of demand and supply, that is at point E, the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity is determined. The equilibrium price in this case is OP and equilibrium quantity in this case is OQ. Now, suppose that the government wants the seller or the producer to sell their product at less than the equilibrium price for the benefit of the consumer, and it fixes the price of the commodity at OP2. So, obviously, it is visible from the diagram that price OP2 is less than price OP. OP is the market determined price and OP2 is the government fixed price. So, under this situation, there will be shortage in the market. Since the price is lower than the equilibrium price, the quantity demanded will be more and quantity supplied will be less. So, this creates a kind of shortage or demand, the supply deficiency or excess of demand in the market. What will be the consequence of the price control and rationing? The first important consequence of the price control would be, there may be a situation of shortage in the market. Since demand is greater than supply, so demand of several consumers would go unsatisfied. It may be a case that since there is shortage in the market, So, all the consumers may not be able to procure the commodity at the prevailing price that has been fixed by the government. So, demand of many of the consumers would remain unsatisfied in this situation. This is one important consequence of the price control, and this situation has emerged because of the price ceiling. The second important consequence is the emergence of the black marketing. The price rationing may encourage black marketing of the rationed commodities. It may happen that some of the consumers, some of the individuals may be willing to pay higher price, and even at higher increased price or higher price, they would be willing to procure that commodity, they would be willing to consume that commodity. So, the suppliers adopting the spurious method to sell the commodity in the market, they may resort to the black marketing of the commodity. So, this is another adverse effect, adverse consequence of the price control or price ceiling policy. An important positive consequence for the poor consumers is that they will be able to consume the commodity at a price which is lower than the equilibrium price. This is one important positive consequence of the price ceiling, and perhaps this is the consideration in the mind of the government, normally speaking, that the government imposes the price control or price ceiling on the sale of a commodity. The purpose is that there may be several consumers in the society who may not be able to buy the commodity, who may not be able to consume the commodity if the prices are allowed to rest at a point of intersection of quantity demanded and quantity supplied. In their with reference to their purchasing power, the price fixed at the intersection of the quantity demanded and quantity supplied may be beyond their capacity, beyond their purchasing power. So, in order to help those consumers, low income consumers, the consumers having low purchasing power, the government fixes the ceiling, fixes the price, maximum price to be charged by the seller or the producer of a commodity. So, this is one important positive effect of the price ceiling or price control. Another important consequence of price control may be that transfer of resources from socially less important to more desirable uses may be promoted. Say, if there is price ceiling and there is a shortage of supply in the market, and it means what? It means production of the commodity would be lesser than the equilibrium quantity. It means that some of the resources that would have otherwise been allocated for the production of this commodity, had the government not imposed the price ceiling on the production of this commodity and the price of this commodity, the resources so released from the production of this commodity may be allocated to the production of some more useful, some more beneficial commodities, which is more desirable from the point of view of the social welfare. So, it may be a policy of the government, policy measure of the government also to encourage, to promote transfer of resources from less important uses to more important uses, or more to such channels which are socially more desirable. What steps should be taken, what steps normally the government takes to tackle the situation of shortage when the price control or price ceiling is imposed? One important step is rationing, which is normally adopted by any government. Under this system, each consumer is given only a fixed quota, either through a coupon or a ration card. Every consumer is allotted a certain quantity, maximum quantity of the commodity to be purchased or consumed. A consumer cannot purchase more than the allotted quota of that commodity. So, by doing rationing, the purpose is to promote the equitable distribution of the commodity among different people, among different sections of the society at the lower prices. So, under rationing, every consumer has a fair chance to get some quantity of the commodity which is in short supply, which is lower in supply. So, it would not be a case that some of the consumers, since they have a high purchasing power, would go away with the huge quantity of that commodity, and some consumers would be deprived from consuming that commodity. By adopting the policy of rationing, the purpose of the government is to ensure that each and every individual gets at least the minimum quantity of consumption of that, the minimum quantity of the commodity for the consumption purposes. Another important step may be the adoption of the first come first served basis or the queue system. It may happen that the shopkeepers or the dealers may impose on the consumers the condition of first come first service, that the consumers who have approached the shopkeeper or the dealer first, they would get the commodity in whatever quantity is available and whatever quantity is desirable, and the consumers who lagged behind, they would be deprived of, they would not get the supply of that commodity. So, it may be a case that some of the consumers who are lagging behind, who are late in approaching the sellers or the dealer, would not get the any quantity of the commodity at all. The last step may be seller's discretion. It may be that the supply of the commodity, sale of the commodity may be carried out as per the whims and fancy, as per the discretion of the seller. But under this method, chances of discrimination from the seller are very high. It may happen that the seller may favor unfavorably, unduly favor some of the consumers in supplying that commodity, since the consumer is seems to be very loyal to the seller, to the shopkeeper, very regular to the shopkeeper, or the consumer who are also ready to pay higher than the normal price. So, the seller may adopt a discretionary policy to sell the commodity in the situation of the price control or the price ceiling. Under such situations, the rationing method and quota system may be, to a very large extent, may be desirable to promote equity in the distribution of the commodity. However, the first come first served basis and seller's discretion may not be very desirable from the social point of view, because in a way these two methods promote a kind of discrimination among the consumers on behalf of the seller or the shopkeeper of the commodity concerned. Second important application of the price support of the floor price. Price support of floor price is the price set by the government below which the price of a commodity, price of a good or service cannot fall. So, this is the benchmark price set by the government, and this method, this measure is adopted by the government to protect the interest of the producer or supplier of a good or service. So, the audience, the stakeholders of the price ceiling and price support or floor price are different from each other. These are two different stakeholders in the market, in the process of exchange of different goods and services. The price ceiling is imposed to protect the interest of the consumers by the government, and the floor price is adopted, it is imposed by the government to protect the interest of the producers or the supplier of a particular commodity. Normally, Price support policy is adopted for several agricultural crops or to enact the minimum wage act in our country. More often than not, we read in our daily newspaper, we hear in the television news, we hear the views of different experts in different seminars and conferences that this time the government has not increased the procurement price or support price of wheat, sugarcane, and this time the government has increased the support price of program, so on and so forth. These news are normally very regular feature of our day-to-day life, and periodically the government announces the floor price or minimum support price, that is also known as MSP, of different goods and goods, particularly the agricultural goods in our economy. The fixation of minimum wage of different category of the labor is also an important example of the floor price being adopted by the government. Floor price again may be fixed at any of the following levels. One is when floor price is equal to equilibrium price. So, when floor price is equal to equilibrium price, normally there would be no effect on the prevailing price and quantity of the commodity in the market. Second situation may be that floor price is less than the equilibrium price. Here again there would be no effect on the market price and quantity of the commodity in the short run. However, in the long run, as we discussed in our earlier slides, in case of the price ceiling, that if the ceiling price is fixed above the prevailing price, it will have no effect on the market price in the short run. However, in the long run, the price would increase to be equal to equilibrium price via changes in demand and supply. So, demand and supply, you should note that these are the two important variables which by their interplay can bring about changes in the price of the commodity, the floor price, so that the floor price in the long run becomes equal to the equilibrium price. Third situation may be that price ceiling is greater than equilibrium price. This is a situation, if this situation exists, then the situation of excess supply or surplus of the commodity, surplus supply in the market would arise. The situation of deficient demand and excess supply or surplus supply may be depicted with the help of this diagram. In this diagram, again the OX axis represents the horizontal axis, represents the quantity demanded of the commodity, and OY axis represents the price charged for different quantities of the commodity. DD is demand curve, SS is the supply curve, and by interaction of demand and supply curves at point E, we see that equilibrium price OP has been determined, and with reference to this equilibrium price OP, the equilibrium quantity OQ has also been determined. Now, suppose that government has fixed the price of the commodity at OP1, and it is mandated by the government that this is the minimum price. OP1 is the minimum price as per the mandate of the government, and the commodity cannot be sold below this price. Then what would happen? Since the price of the commodity is higher than the equilibrium price, a surplus situation would arise, because at this price the quantity demanded would be less and quantity supplied would be more. So, in this diagram, the surplus that has been generated as a result of the fixation of the floor price or minimum support price is the gap shown by AB, A on A point on demand curve and B point on the supply curve, as visible in this diagram. So, this is a kind of distortion. This policy creates a kind of distortion in the free play of the market forces, but in the interest of the producers, many a time the government is compelled, the government is forced to adopt this policy of this policy of floor price. Now, as a result of adopting the minimum support price, floor price, or the price support, what may be its consequences? It is important to look into it. The first important consequence is the increase in volume of unsold stocks, which may force the seller to sell their products at lower price than the floor price. We all know that in the market economy or even in a mixed economic system, the producers or the sellers are guided mainly by the maximization of their profit, and if the sellers or producers face the situation of increasing stocks of unsold goods, increasing size of the inventories of the finished products, then it will be against their objective of maximization of profit. So, what would they do? They will decrease the price of the commodity. They would start selling the commodity at the price which is lower than the floor price. If the sellers or producers themselves adopt this the measure to sell the commodity at the price lower than the floor price, then there is no use of the fixation of the floor price, and the policy of floor price would prove to be self-defeating. So, this is one important consequence. Therefore, the government, while adopting the policy of the floor price, it should arrange to increase the aggregate demand for that commodity, particularly for that commodity, or it should be ready to purchase whatever surplus is created in the market as a result of fixation of this floor price. The second important consequence is that forced increase in buffer stock would emerge. The forced increase in buffer stock by the government to sustain the floor price policy, which many a times may prove to be a bad economic decision. As we have discussed just now, that if the sellers are forced to sell their product at the price which is lower than the floor price, in order to justify their policy, the government may be forced to procure, may be forced to purchase all the surplus quantity of the product, and thereby it may create a buffer stock. So, many a times creating buffer stock just to justify, just to sustain the floor price policy, it may be a bad economic decision. So, while fixing the floor price, the government should take into consideration several economic consequences that may arise post fixation of the floor price of a commodity. What are the applications of price support policy or minimum price legislation? The first important application is price support policy is adopted to guarantee a minimum amount of returns to the producer of a commodity. It may be a case where government is willing to guarantee a minimum amount of income, a minimum amount of revenue to the producers of the commodity, and normally it happens in case of the agricultural producers, the farmers of the country. And this policy is adopted mainly for commodities whose prices are quite fluctuating in nature. We all know that the prices of the agricultural crops are quite fluctuating, very fluctuating in nature. During the bumper crop, the price of the agricultural crop may fall tremendously, and during the period of shortage, in the period of drought and flood, where there is less production of the agricultural produce, the prices may shoot up like anything. So, government has to intervene under both these situations and fix the price support policy, the minimum price for the commodity. If the government wants to promote the production consumption of any particular commodity, then again the government would adopt this policy of MSP, minimum support price, because if by fixing the minimum support for the commodity, the government intends to guarantee a certain amount of income to the farmers and any producer for that matter, and the farmers or the producers of that commodity are encouraged, rest assured about their income, they are encouraged to invest again in the production of that commodity, so that the supply of the commodity increases in future uninterrupted. Another important situation where this MSP is implemented is the case when demand for and supply of the product is relatively inelastic. We all know that demand for and supply of the agriculture produce is relatively inelastic, and when demand is relatively inelastic, the revenue of the farmers would not increase in case the price falls too much, and the supply of the product cannot increase immediately even if prices are very high. So, in order to insulate both the consumers and producers from too much of fluctuations in the prices of the commodity, in order to protect the interest of both the producers and consumers, the government intervenes in the market through the implementation of the policies related to minimum support price or price support policy. This is the diagram which shows the operation of the minimum support price in the market. Again, OX axis represents the quantity and OY axis represents price as usual. The initial fixation of the equilibrium price and quantity is at OP and OQ respectively, with reference to the intersection point of demand and supply at point E. Now, suppose that the price of the supply of the commodity increases from SS to SS1, then in response to the price fixed by the government from OP to OP2. OP2 is the price fixed by the government, and as a consequence of this, the quantity supplied has increased from OQ to OQ2. Then how this surplus situation would be tackled by the government? This would be tackled by the purchase of the surplus quantity by the government, so that the farmers or the producers are getting their due remuneration, as well as the consumers would get the commodity at a very reasonable price. Now, what are the other applications of the price support policy or the minimum price legislation? This is the minimum wage legislation. Minimum wage legislation is enacted by the government to protect the workers against fall in wage rate owing to the working of market forces related to labor. What is price of labor? Price of labor is its wage rate, and while fixing the price of the labor, that is fixed in the process of fixation of the wage rate through the interaction of demand for labor and supply of labor, one thing should be kept always in mind, that labor is totally different from any other factor of production, say land, capital or any other inputs, because labor is a living being and its reward, its price cannot be determined purely taking into consideration the demand for and supply of labor. So, in short, we can say that price mechanism cannot be the sole criterion to fix its price, that is wage rate. So, we have to keep in mind that consumer or the labor needs a minimum amount of income, a minimum amount of purchasing power to live a dignified life, to live a minimum standard of living. So, therefore, it may happen that the wage rate fixed by the free play of market forces may be much below the minimum wage rate required to live a living by the workers. Therefore, government may intervenes by enacting the minimum wage legislation in the interest of the workers, even if this wage is higher than the equilibrium wage rate determined by the price, the demand for and supply of the labor. This is the diagram showing minimum wage legislation, wages and employment. DD is the demand for labor, SS is the supply of labor, and at equilibrium point E, OW is the wage rate that is fixed, that is determined by the free play of market forces, that is demand for and supply of labor. With reference to this equilibrium point E and wage rate OW, the total employment, the total workers employed is OL. Now, suppose that in the eyes of the government, in the opinion of the government, this wage rate is lower than the desirable, and the government fixes a wage rate which is higher than the equilibrium wage rate, and the minimum wage rate fixed by the government is, say for example, OW1. What will be its impact? At OW1 wage rate, the demand for workers from the employer would be OL1, and while supply would be W1B. So, this is a gap, this is a kind of, you can say, surplus of labor in the market. So, in the terms of economics, we can say that this is creating a kind of distortion in the labor market. So, AB is the surplus of labor, and if OL is the total quantity of workers available in the economy, or in other words we can say that, for example, OL is the level of full employment in the economy, then this L1L would be the quantity of unemployment generated as a result of fixation of minimum wages OW as compared to OW1 as compared to OW. So, if the government intervenes in the market by fixing the minimum wage of the workers, it is very likely that some quantity of unemployment may be generated. So, what the government should do? The government should create additional employment opportunities along with intervening in the labor market. If additional employment opportunities are created in the market, whatever unemployment is created, whatever unemployment is generated in the market as a result of fixation of minimum wage rate will be absorbed in the labor market, and there will be no situation of unemployment in the market. Now, we can say something about the consumer surplus and producer surplus, which is again a very important application of the demand and supply analysis. Consumer surplus is the difference between amount that a consumer is willing to pay for a given quantity of a commodity and the amount that he actually pays for it. The higher the price, the lower is the consumer surplus and vice versa. In the following diagram, consumer surplus is the area OLEQ0 minus area OP0EQ0, and that is equal to P0LE. This is the diagram where you can see the consumer surplus, and the consumer surplus, in other words, may be seen as the area above the price line and below the demand curve, that is P0LE in this diagram, and this is mentioned by the arrow also, the area of consumer surplus. And another important concept, another important application of the the demand and supply analysis is the producer's surplus, which is an economic measure of the difference between the amount a producer of a good receives and the minimum amount the producer is willing to accept for the good. The difference or surplus amount is the benefit the producer receives by selling the good in the market. Producer would not sell his good if they do not get at least marginal cost to produce that commodity. In the above diagram, again, producer surplus is the area OP0EQ0 minus area OMEQ0, which is equal to area MP0E, and we can see in this diagram that this area OP0E, that is also mentioned by the arrow mark producer surplus. This is the area above the supply curve and below the market price. So, these are the two important applications of the demand and supply analysis, and if we go into the details of the producers and consumer surplus, we would also come across a very important concept known as allocative efficiency, and this allocative efficiency is achieved when both consumer surplus as well as producer surplus are maximized, and this situation is achieved under perfect competition, where it is not possible to make anyone, either consumer or producer, better off without making others worse off. So, this is a very ideal situation where both the producers and the consumer surplus are maximized, and this analysis is possible mainly because of the knowledge of the demand, supply and equilibrium price that has been discussed in our previous lectures. Thank you very much, and we will meet in the next series of the lectures. Thank you very much.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. And dear friends, keep writing us, keep watching us. To contact us, you can write us at info.cec@nic.in. We would be meeting again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
Thanks a lot.